My name is Jack Smith, and I am a police detective in a small town in the Midwest. The night it all began, I was on duty, unaware that my life was about to change forever. My attention was drawn to a strange call at the station. The caller was out of breath and asking for help. He claimed to have spotted a suspicious man in his neighborhood who was following him. I would not have paid much attention to this if it had not been for the feeling that something was wrong. I asked the duty officer to send me to the caller's address. When I arrived, I saw that the house was in the shadows and only one window on the second floor was dimly lit. Near the front door stood a man, apparently the caller, named Tom Brown. Tom was alarmed and pointed towards a dark alley. He claimed to have spotted the figure of a man who he thought had been following him for the last few days. We looked around but found nothing suspicious. I took his statement and promised to investigate. The next day, while reviewing the surveillance footage, I noticed a hooded man who had indeed passed by Tom's house several times. His face was indistinct, but his manner of movement and his gaze caught my attention. He would stop, look at the house, and write something down in a notebook. I went back to Tom to find out more. He told me that a few months ago there had been an incident where his car had been broken into, but nothing had been stolen. He hadn't thought much of it at the time, but now, in light of what was happening, it was alarming. I asked him to be vigilant and stay calm. That same night, I got another call. This time, Tom was scared to death. He had seen the hooded man again, and he was standing right in front of his window. When I arrived, no one was there, but there was a cigarette lying on the ground under the window, still warm. It was a sign that someone had been there quite recently. We increased patrols in the area and began searching for the suspect. But all our efforts were in vain. The trail was lost every time we thought we were about to catch him. Tom was becoming more and more paranoid, and it was understandable. I knew he was really in danger. A few days passed when Tom went missing. His wife, Sarah, called me hysterically, telling me that he hadn't returned home after going to the store. We started looking, and a few hours later we found his car on the side of the road. His belongings were inside, but Tom himself was gone. I knew time was against us. We got all the police on our feet and started combing the wooded area next to the road. A few hours later, we found Tom. He was dead, his body mutilated, and the letter K carved into his chest. This was the first victim of the serial killer we were about to encounter. An investigation began that drew me into a whirlpool of terrible events. The killer left no traces. He was like a ghost, but without mysticism. Each of his murders was carefully thought out, and we could not predict who would be the next victim. My task was to catch him before he killed again. Weeks passed, and it seemed the killer was hiding. We continued our investigation, but there was little evidence. I couldn't get the idea out of my head that he was watching us, stalking us like a predator stalks its prey. One night, as I was walking home, I felt like I was being watched. The feeling didn't go away until I walked into the house and closed the door behind me. The next morning, I was woken up by the doorbell. It was Sarah, Tom's wife. She was in a terrible state, crying and saying that someone was calling her at night and saying nothing. I realized that the killer had decided to play a new game with us. We installed a bug on her phone, hoping that it would help us track him down. The wiretapping yielded results. We detected several calls from different numbers, which were registered to fictitious names. In one of the calls, we heard a whisper that was impossible to understand. This was a clear sign that the killer was still playing with us. He was enjoying our helplessness. Soon we received another missing person report. This time it was Jim Harris, a local businessman. His car had been found on a deserted road, just like Tom's. We knew we had little time to find him alive. We began our search from the spot where his car had been found. A few hours later, we found Jim. His body was mutilated, just like Tom's. The letter I was carved into his chest. We now knew it was no accident, and the letters spelled out a word. But what word, and what did it mean? It was a clue, but we needed more information. We checked everyone who might be connected to Jim and Tom, but found nothing. Then I decided to look at old cases that might have similar elements. It turned out that a few years ago, in a neighboring town, there had been a series of murders with similar features. The killer was never caught. I contacted a detective from that town, Michael Johnson. He told me that at the time they had suspicions about one person, but there was not enough evidence. His name was Carl Wallace. He moved to another town after suspicion fell on him. Carl was smart and secretive, and that made him dangerous. We started investigating Carl Wallace. He was clean, no crime, no suspicious activity. But I had a feeling it was him. We put him under surveillance to find out what he was doing. He was living a normal life, working in an office, not arousing suspicion. One night, I decided to follow him after work. Carl got in his car and drove out of town. He stopped at an old, abandoned warehouse. I watched him go inside. A few hours passed, and he came out carrying a heavy bag. I followed him until he returned home. The next day, we decided to search the warehouse. Inside the warehouse, we found a horrific sight. There were the remains of several people murdered with extreme cruelty. Letters were carved into the walls, just like on the bodies of the victims. This was the evidence we needed. We arrested Carl Wallace, but he only grinned, knowing that he had an accomplice to continue his work. Carl Wallace was apprehended and sent to prison, but the feeling that the nightmare was not over yet did not leave me. I knew that he might have had an accomplice. We continued our investigation, but each time we came to a dead end. Carl said nothing, and those we questioned either knew nothing or were afraid to speak. One evening, I received an anonymous letter. It contained only one word: midnight. I didn't know what that meant, but I decided to be on guard. At midnight, I went on duty, checking every corner of our city. Suddenly, I noticed a car parked near the old bridge. There was no one inside, but there was a bloody knife on the back seat. I knew it was a trap, but I didn't know who it was for. We increased patrols, but nothing happened until the morning. The next morning, I got a call from Jennifer, Jim Harris' wife. She was in a panic, saying that someone was trying to break into their house. I rushed there. When I arrived, I found Jennifer's door had been forced open. No one was inside, but the smell of blood was in the air. I searched the house and found Jennifer in the basement, tied up and beaten. She was alive, but very scared. We called an ambulance and took her to the hospital. Jennifer said the assailant was wearing a mask and that he knew about Carl. This confirmed my suspicions that Carl had an accomplice. We began checking all of Carl's contacts, but the suspect was still elusive. Jennifer gave a description of the mask, and this could help us in our investigation. We distributed the description of the mask among the residents of the city and began to survey. One of the local residents, Mary, remembered that she had seen a similar mask on her neighbor, Henry. We decided to check this information. Henry turned out to be withdrawn and not very talkative, but we had permission to search his house. We found an arsenal of guns and masks in Henry's house, but there was no evidence linking him to the murders. However, his behavior and the finds in his house were alarming. We decided to continue monitoring him. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were missing something. One night I got a call from my colleague, David. He said he had seen Henry near the old warehouse, the same one where we had found the bodies. I went there immediately. When I arrived, Henry was already leaving, but I managed to follow him to his house. It was strange that he was going back there again. The next day we decided to arrest Henry. When we searched his car, we found another mask and photos of all our victims. That was enough for an arrest. We questioned him, but Henry remained silent. He just looked at us with a cold smile. We realized that this was not the end. We tightened security around Jennifer and other potential victims. But the killer was always one step ahead. Soon we received word of another murder. This time the victim was our colleague, David. He was found in his home, and the letter K was carved into his chest. It was a sign that the game was on. David's death shook us all. It was personal. We knew the killer was in our midst, and he knew our every move. We began reviewing all the files, all the records and conversations to see how he was getting his information. It soon became clear that we had a leak. We conducted an internal investigation and found out that one of our employees was passing information to the killer. It was shocking, but everything pointed to Tim, a young officer who had recently joined our department. His behavior was suspicious, so we decided to check him out. When we started following Tim, he started acting strangely. He would often meet with people we didn't know and would disappear for long periods of time without explanation. We decided to question him. When pressed, Tim admitted that he had been passing information to an unknown person for money, but he didn't know who it was. Tim gave us the phone number he was using. We traced the calls and found out that the number was registered to a front man. It didn't help us much, but we kept looking. Soon, we received another anonymous letter saying that the next victim would be connected to Carl's case. We started checking all of Carl's old cases and found one that caught our attention. It was a missing girl case, Jessica, who worked in the same office as Carl. We decided to find her family and learn more about her disappearance. We contacted Jessica's parents, who told us that she had been in a close relationship with Carl, but had suddenly disappeared. They did not believe that she had simply left, as the official version claimed. We began looking for evidence that Carl might have been involved in her disappearance. We found Jessica's old notebook, which contained notes about her meetings with Carl. This confirmed their connection. We also found several photographs in which Carl was captured with other people we did not know. This could be a clue. In one of the photographs, we recognized one person. It was Tom Brown, the killer's first victim. That tied everything together. Carl and Tom knew each other, and perhaps that was the motive for the murder. We began to look for connections between the other victims and Carl. We soon discovered that all the victims worked in the same area or were connected to Carl through mutual acquaintances. It was a network that we had not noticed before. We realized that the killer was not choosing his victims randomly, but according to a pattern. We decided to act. We set up an ambush and watched the houses of potential victims. Our team was ready at any moment, but the killer was one step ahead again. One night, we received a message about a new murder. The victim was a girl named Emily who worked in the same office as Jessica. At the crime scene, we found another letter A on Emily's chest. It was another sign that the game was going on. We increased the pressure on Carl, but he remained silent. I felt that we were close to a solution, but the killer was cunning and devious. We started checking everyone who worked with Carl and Jessica. One of these people was Michael, Carl's former colleague. He seemed suspicious, so we decided to question him. Michael initially denied his involvement, but under pressure he admitted that he knew about Carl's business and was his accomplice. Michael said that Carl was the ringleader, but he had a whole group of people who helped him with the killings. It was a carefully organized network that had been operating for several years. Michael gave us the names of the rest of the people involved, and we began making arrests. We arrested several people, including several of Carl's colleagues. They all denied involvement, but the evidence was overwhelming. We found evidence that linked them to the crime scenes. It was the beginning of the end for their gang. Soon, we received another message from the killer. This time, he threatened my family. I realized it was getting personal. We increased security around my house and started looking for a way to catch him. We were running out of time, and we had to act fast. One night, I received a call from an anonymous source. He said he knew who the killer was and was willing to meet me. I agreed to the meeting, realizing that it could be a trap. I took a few colleagues with me and went to the specified location. At the meeting place, a hooded man was waiting for us. He said his name was John and that he was part of Carl's gang, but decided to give them all up to save his life. He gave us information about the last member of the gang who was still at large. We found out that the last member of the gang was hiding in an abandoned house outside the city. We went there immediately. The house was dark and empty, but we knew he was there somewhere. We searched every corner and finally found him in the basement. He was armed and ready to fight. After a fierce shootout, we arrested the last member of the gang. It was the end of a long and terrible journey. We were finally able to break this chain of murders. All suspects were detained, and we could breathe a sigh of relief. I returned home, tired but satisfied. We had done it. We had caught the killer and his accomplices. The city could sleep peacefully again. But deep down, I knew that such nightmares never completely end. I would continue my work to protect people and prevent evil from taking over again. A few months passed and the city began to return to normal. It seemed that the nightmare was finally over. But one night I received an anonymous letter. Inside was only one item, an old photo of Carl with a group of people. On the back was written, "This is not the end yet." The photo made me think back to all the horrors of the last months. I knew that someone was still at large. We decided to check everyone in the photo, but most of them were either dead or had disappeared without a trace. There was only one person left, Marcus, an old friend of Carl. We started following Marcus, but he was cautious. Every step he took was calculated. He didn't contact anyone and was acting extremely suspicious. We decided to set up an ambush and wait for the right moment to arrest him. One night, Marcus went out of town. We followed him at a safe distance. He stopped at an old abandoned house. We decided not to intervene right away so as not to scare him off, and watched from afar. Inside the house, he met someone, but because of the darkness, we could not see who it was. When Marcus left the house, we decided to go inside. It was dark and damp, but in one corner we found a makeshift office. The walls were covered with maps and photographs, including some of our previous victims. This was the killer's lair. We found several notes that outlined plans for further murders. These notes helped us understand that the killer did not act alone. He had an accomplice who continued Carl's work. We decided to continue watching Marcus, hoping that he would lead us to his accomplice. A few days later, Marcus went out of town again. We followed him, and this time he met a man we didn't know. We were able to take some photos and started checking his identity. It was Jacob, an old acquaintance of Marcus and Carl. We started following Jacob. He was even more cautious than Marcus. We checked all his contacts and found out that he was connected to several criminal groups, but we didn't have enough evidence to arrest him. One night, Jacob met another man. It was the same John who had previously given us Carl's entire gang. We realized that John was playing a double game. He was pretending to help us, but in reality, he continued to cooperate with the killers. We arrested John and began interrogating him. Under pressure, he admitted to working for Jacob and Marcus, but claimed he had never been involved in the killings. He gave us information about our next target, a local journalist who had been covering our cases. We increased security around the journalist, but the killer was always one step ahead. One night, the journalist disappeared. We found his car, but he was nowhere to be found. At the scene, we found only a bloody knife and a note with one letter, K. We realized that this was again the work of Marcus and Jacob. We began searching for the journalist, combing through all possible places where he could be held. Soon we received a tip that he had been seen in an old abandoned building on the outskirts of the city. We arrived at the scene and began searching. The building had been abandoned for many years, but inside we found evidence of recent human presence. We found a journalist, tied up and beaten, but alive. He said he had been held there for several days and that the killers were planning another murder. We immediately increased our patrols and started looking for new leads. The journalist gave us important information that the killers were planning to meet at an old warehouse. We prepared an operation and set up an ambush. When Marcus and Jacob arrived at the warehouse, we were ready. We surrounded them and arrested them without firing a shot. In their car, we found weapons and evidence linking them to several murders. Finally, we were able to put an end to this bloody series. Marcus and Jacob were taken into custody, and we began the trial. It was a long and difficult ordeal, but we achieved justice for all the victims. The city could breathe easy again. But even after the arrests, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still unsolved. I started receiving anonymous threatening letters that made me wary. Someone was still at large, someone who knew all the details of our investigations. I began my own investigation following all possible leads. It turned out that one of our former colleagues, whom we had thought dead, was alive and operating in the shadows. It was Lewis, an old friend of Carl's and one of the smartest people I knew. Lewis was a master of disguise. He could hide in plain sight and remain undetected. We began following him and soon discovered that he was the brains of the entire operation. He controlled everyone from the shadows and planned every move. We realized that catching Lewis would not be easy. He knew all our methods and anticipated our actions. We decided to use his own methods against him. We created false trails and began spreading disinformation to force him to come out of hiding. Soon, Lewis made a mistake. He tried to contact one of his old accomplices, not knowing that he had long been under our control. We tracked him down and set up an ambush. Lewis realized that he was caught, but still tried to resist. After a fierce battle, we arrested Lewis. He was the last link in this chain of murders. We were finally able to put an end to this nightmare. All members of the gang were detained and the city could breathe a sigh of relief. Several years have passed, and life in the city has returned to normal, but the memory of those terrible events will always remain with me. I will continue my work to prevent such tragedies from happening again. I will always be on guard, protecting my city and my people. Several months had passed since we had arrested Lewis. The city was slowly returning to normal, but I still felt that the threat had not completely disappeared. One morning, I received a call from the chief. He said he had received a threatening letter signed by a familiar alias, Ghost. We knew that the Ghost was someone close to Lewis. The letter spoke of a new round of violence and that the city would be under attack again if we did not release Lewis. It was a serious statement, and we began an investigation to find out who was behind it. We increased Lewis' security in prison, fearing an attempt to free him. At the same time, we began checking all of Lewis' connections to find a possible accomplice. One suspect was his old friend Sam, who had recently been released from prison on parole. Sam was an IT professional and could organize such a complex operation. We started following him and soon found out that he was in contact with several suspicious people. We got permission to wiretap his phone calls and track his movements. One day, we overheard a suspicious conversation. Sam was talking about some plan and a party that was going to take place in an old warehouse on the outskirts of town. We decided to set up an ambush and prevent a possible crime. When Sam arrived at the warehouse, we were ready. He met with several people and we waited for the right moment to arrest him. During the search of the warehouse, we found weapons and plans to attack the prison where Lewis was being held. This confirmed our suspicions. Sam and his accomplices were arrested. We interrogated them and found out that they were planning a large-scale attack to free Lewis and start a new wave of killings. It was a serious blow to their plans, but we knew it wouldn't end there. During interrogation, Sam revealed that Lewis had another accomplice, whom they called the Master. He was the brains of the operation and ran everything from the shadows. We began searching for the Master, but there was little information. It was like looking for a needle in a haystack. We checked all possible traces and contacts of Lewis, but we could not find anything concrete. One night I received an anonymous message on my phone. It said that the Master was living among us and that he knew our every move. It was threatening and alarming. We increased security measures and began checking all police and prison employees to eliminate the possibility of information leakage. Soon, we identified one suspicious person, Mark, who worked in the technical department. He had access to all our data. We started following Mark and soon found out that he was indeed passing information to an unknown person. We decided to search his house and found a lot of evidence confirming his connection to Lewis and the Master. This was a major breakthrough in the investigation. Mark was arrested and began to cooperate with us. He revealed that the Master was a former military strategist named Victor, who used his skills to organize criminal activities. Victor was very careful and always remained in the shadows. We started looking for Victor, checking all possible places of his stay. Soon we received a tip that he was hiding in an abandoned house outside the city. We decided to act immediately and organized an operation to capture him. When we arrived at the scene, Victor attempted to escape, but we managed to detain him. In his hideout, we found evidence linking him to the planning of all the previous crimes. Victor was arrested and taken to prison. Interrogating Victor was difficult. He was an experienced manipulator and tried to confuse us, but eventually he started talking. He told us about his plans and how he controlled the actions of Lewis and his gang. This was important evidence that helped us complete the investigation. Victor and all his accomplices were convicted and sentenced to long prison terms. The city could finally breathe a sigh of relief. But I knew my work was not yet done. There would always be those who wanted to repeat these horrors. Several years passed. The city became a calmer and safer place. But I always remained vigilant, knowing that evil could return at any moment. I continued to work, protecting my city and its people. One morning, I received an email from a former colleague. He wrote that there were messages on a darknet forum about someone looking for information about our investigations. This was a warning sign, so we started investigating. We found out that the forum was discussing the cases of Lewis and Victor, and that someone was planning to continue their case. This was a serious threat, and we began tracking down anyone who might be involved in these discussions. We soon found several suspicious accounts associated with the forum. One of them belonged to a man named Alex, who lived in our city. We started following him and found out that he was really interested in our investigations. We searched Alex's house and found a lot of material on Lewis and Victor. There were photos, notes, and plans that he was going to implement. Alex was arrested and we began interrogating him. Alex turned out to be a fanatic who admired Lewis and Victor. He planned to continue their work and organize more murders. We were able to stop his plans, but it was a serious signal that the threat still exists. We tightened our security measures and began monitoring anyone who might be connected to Alex. It was difficult but necessary to prevent further crimes. I knew my job would never be completely over. One night I received a call from a colleague. He said he had received an anonymous threatening message. We started investigating and found out that it was a person who had previously been in contact with Alex. We started following him. We found out that this man, named Dan, was a close friend of Alex. He also shared his views and planned to continue the work of Lewis and Victor. We decided to arrest him before he could do anything. Dan was arrested at his home. We found plans for more murders and evidence of his connection to Alex. He began to cooperate with us and gave us information about other possible accomplices. This was an important step in our investigation. We began arresting everyone we could identify thanks to Dan's information. It was a difficult and dangerous case, but we were able to prevent further. Several months passed, and life in the city returned to normal, but I always remained vigilant, knowing that the threat could reappear. I continued my work protecting the city and its inhabitants. One day I received a letter from one of the prisoners. He wrote that they were preparing an escape plan in prison and that someone from outside was helping them. This was a serious threat, and we started checking all the prisoners' contacts. Part 103. We found out that one of the prison guards had been bribed and was going to help the prisoners escape. We immediately arrested him and prevented the escape. This was an important step in securing the city. Following this incident, we increased security measures in the prison and began checking all employees. This was necessary to prevent further escape attempts and maintain peace in the city. Several years passed, and life in the city became calmer. We were able to prevent many crimes and ensure the safety of residents. But I always remained vigilant, knowing that the threat could reappear. Life in the city went on as usual, and it seemed that the nightmare was behind us. However, one day I received an unexpected call. On the other end of the line was John, the same informant who once helped us expose the Lewis gang. He told me that there were rumors in the prison about a new leader who planned to take control of the remaining criminal groups. We began investigating and discovered that there was indeed a new kingpin in the prison named Raymond. He had connections to Lewis and Victor and was now seeking to continue their legacy. We tightened security around key facilities and began monitoring Raymond's every move. Raymond was smart and careful. He knew how to cover his tracks and avoid attention. We realized we would need new tactics to catch him. We planted our man in his circle to get more information. Soon, our informant reported that Raymond was planning to organize a prison break. This was a serious threat, and we began preparing to prevent this escape. We increased security and developed a contingency plan. One night, we received a signal from our informant. Raymond and his men began to implement their plan. We immediately went to the prison and began an operation to prevent the escape. It was a tense night, but we were able to prevent their attempt. Raymond was arrested and transferred to a maximum security prison. We knew that this was a temporary measure and that he would look for new ways to continue his activities. We continued to monitor his connections and contacts. We found out that Raymond had connections outside of prison. He was in contact with people who helped him coordinate his actions. We began investigating and soon found one of his key accomplices named Andrew. Andrew was a logistics professional who helped organize the supply of weapons and other resources for Raymond's gang. We began following him and soon discovered that he was preparing a major arms smuggling operation. We set up an ambush and managed to catch Andrew red-handed. He was arrested and began to cooperate with us, providing important information about Raymond's plans. This was an important step in our investigation, but the threat still remained. Soon, we received information about a new person in Raymond's entourage, Jason. He was a former military man and an explosives expert. This made him especially dangerous. We began to follow Jason and found out that he was preparing a terrorist attack on one of the key objects of the city. We carried out an operation to detain Jason and were able to prevent a terrorist attack. He was arrested and began to cooperate with us. He told us about Raymond's new plans and his attempts to restore the criminal network. We continued to arrest members of Raymond's gang and gradually dismantled his network. It was long and dangerous work, but we were able to prevent many crimes and keep the city safe. Several years passed, and the city became a calm and safe place again. We were able to prevent many crimes and arrest many dangerous criminals, but I knew that my work would never be completely finished. I continued to work to protect my city and its people. One day I received an unexpected letter. It said that there was new evidence that could change the course of our investigations. I met the person who sent the letter. It was Mark, one of the former members of Lewis Gang. Mark said he had important information about the new plans of the criminal group, which is trying to restore its activities. He gave us documents and records that could help us in the investigation. We began checking this data and soon found new suspects. We found out that a new group was trying to infiltrate key locations in the city. This was a serious threat, and we took action immediately. We arrested several suspects and thwarted their attempts. During our investigation, we found new evidence that linked the group to Raymond and Lewis. This confirmed our fears that the threat was not yet completely gone. We continued to work to expose all those involved. We have increased security measures and begun screening all personnel at key facilities. This was necessary to prevent further infiltration and sabotage attempts. We have also begun collaborating with federal agencies to share information and coordinate actions. Several months passed, and we were able to prevent many crimes and arrest many suspects. The city could breathe easy again. But I always remained vigilant, knowing that the threat could return at any moment. One night, I got a call from an old friend of mine, Jack, who was working in another city. He said they had new evidence related to our investigations. I decided to go see him and find out more. When I arrived, Jack showed me the documents they had found during their investigation. These were records related to the activities of Lewis and Victor. They contained information about the new plans of the criminal group and their contacts. We began a joint investigation and found out that the criminal group was trying to re-establish its activities in several cities. It was a serious threat, and we began coordinating our actions with other law enforcement agencies. We carried out several operations to detain suspects and were able to prevent many crimes. It was difficult and dangerous work, but we were able to expose many participants and destroy their plans. Several years passed and life in the city became calm and safe again. We were able to prevent many crimes and ensure the safety of residents. But I always remained vigilant, knowing that the threat could reappear.